you, Jason. Good to see you.
Oh, this is such. What have you been up to, Cheekbones?
Well, the first thing was...
Sorry, that's my name for Tim.
I thought going to the commerce business would not, the red chairs wouldn't show up when Kara had emailed me and said, hey, are you going to be around March 3rd? Could you come out to Las Vegas? And I was like, that's really weird. It's at the same dates as Shop Talk. Yeah. And little did I know that you guys are at Shop Talk. Well, thank you. Good to see you here as well as the
Good to see you. You're never going to get rid of me, Tim. I'm going to start, if you don't mind, Jason.
Yeah, sure.
So,
I'm not going to stop you.
Okay, what are you doing? What are you doing? Because, like, okay, I don't even want to, we'll go into oath later, but let's just, like, how did you shift to this? I am unclear because you're the media person.
Yeah.
So what happened? Advertising, media, this is completely another direction.
So I, probably about a year and a half ago, started spending a lot more time just on where the kind of sort of underlying infrastructure in the world was changing around the internet and mobile and all the things that we talked about for years. And one of the things that stood out to me was there's been a couple times in my career where there's been what is basically a fundamental platform shift, and I felt like direct-to-consumer was something that was going to be a platform shift, you know, not for probably the obvious reasons, but some of the reasons that were less obvious, but things that I thought were important for the future. One was data management, just in terms of like things like GDPR and things like that were happening, and I think the power in data is going to shift back more towards the consumer side over the next 10 or 20 years. Thought that would fuel direct-to-consumer. The second is that the product development cycles that were happening at the direct-to-consumer companies were much faster and much deeper than what was happening in kind of the normal channels of product development. And I think that that's another thing that over a 5, 10, 15, 20-year period, these companies are going to have a real advantage in terms of how they develop products and distribute them. And the third thing was just the two-way communication. We at DTX, we have a growing team, but one of the things we say is, two-way or no way. And I think that the two-way...
Wait, what?
Two-way or no way?
Sounds like something from San Francisco. Two-way meaning what?
Two-way communication with the customer, having a relationship with them.
I see, okay.
Kara.
I'm sorry. I asked. What do you want?
Take it anywhere.
And the last thing was just, I think from from how the relationships between consumers and companies are going to change, this seems like a really important trend. And probably there's a really big opportunity here. There may not be, but that's what got me interested in it. And then what we're doing right now is really kind of two simple things. One is we're putting investments directly into DTC companies, so we've done a number of those, and we'll do a few more. The second thing we're doing is spending a lot of time. There's a lot of acronyms in commerce. I didn't spend as much time in commerce, but I've learned a lot of them. One that I hear all the time is when we got into this was CAC, customer acquisition cost, and really on the operating side of the business, what we're doing is not CAC, it's CRAC, which is an unfortunate acronym. But it's customer revenue and acquisition cost, and having the balance on the equation of those two things. So we're going to be testing things in 2019, some experiences and other things that will hopefully put the R back in the CAC equation, and that's what we're working on.
Wow.
And I have another project out in Santa Monica I'm working on, which is separate. It's more of an engineering specific project that we'll talk about later in 2019.
Right.
Let's start with the investment. So you've made, I think you've made about 6, or is it 6 already, or announced 6 already?
We've announced 6, yeah.
And what similarities do those companies have? And maybe you can tell us a couple of them.
Yeah. So all of them have the following characteristics. One is that they're all two-way companies, and they have very deeply thought about how deep in the two-way relationship they're going to go. One I would just pull up is Dirty Lemon, and the founder of that's Zach. It's called Dirty Lemon. It's a drink. It's Irish Nova is the corporate name, but Dirty Lemon's the brand name that people know about. And it's a beverage company, a drink company. And one of the things that struck us when I met with Zach was Dirty Lemon does transactions on text commerce, and they've gotten pretty well known for it in the commerce industry. But when you listen to Zach, how he talks about the company, how he talks about testing product with consumers, from the front end all the way through the payments system. He's incredibly thoughtful about the relationship and taking all the friction out, but also about product development and the science behind how he's developing more and more products in the future. So I'd say that's thread number one. Thread number two is the companies we're investing in know their unit economics at an incredibly deep level. And I think one of the things that's striking is when
As in they work, like the unit economics work?
yeah, they work, or they know why they don't work, and what they're testing to make them work. But I would say all the companies we've invested in have really, really deep understanding of what a single unit, and what I like to say is the net, cost. All of the costs are loaded into that, and I think they have real clarity on that. And I'll give you an example of one of the investments we did in Olive and June, which is in Third Love is the same. We also invested in Third Love. The founders of Olive and June and the founders of Third Love, they understand to such an incredible extent, basically the unit economics. And if you look at Third Love's example, all the way back to what the manufacturing process cost, the foam they develop for their garments at the factory level, all the way through, what it's costing them to distribute it on the street to consumers, and the relationship there. Olive and June is an amazing company that's coming out with some really cool products shortly that really is in the kind of beauty industry. The founders ran essentially nail salons and beauty salons in Los Angeles, for really super celebrities. So they understood how to deal with customers. Then they decided to go to DTC and try to distribute, all over the country with products. And because they had a small business or small businesses that they ran very successfully, they were able to take their mentality in that business, running the business successfully, learn DTC and translate it. But they have done an amazing job of really thinking through what the unit economics are going to be for doing someone in a salon, someone at home, and being able to compare those. And the last thing is I would just say is really the founders themselves. Like, we're looking for people who are obsessed with the categories they're in. And everyone talks about that, but there's a big difference between meeting with founders who are in it for the money and in it just for a financial purpose versus the founders that are in it because that's like they can't help themselves. They're so obsessed with what their product is, their category, and they typically have been doing it. Some of the people we've been investing in have been doing it since they've been really small children. Like, they've been interested in that category. So that's what.
So how much money are you putting? Where are you getting this money?
It's all self-funded right now.
Tim's had a good career.
I'm aware.
And so we've had a lot of people approach us to put money into the company already, and we've turned everybody down. And the reason is, going back to the unit economics, was I didn't want to take anyone's outside money until I felt like the money we were using was used correctly. And we may raise money in the future, but as of right now, we're.
And how much do you put into these companies?
We're putting in,
because there's been efforts to this, like science. I mean, these efforts to create companies.
Yes, we're not creating companies.
You're not like a
we're,
factory of these.
We're getting behind founders.
Right.
So we're putting in hundreds of thousands to millions of dollars, and a couple cases more than that.
And what's your typical? Like, you're the first money in, or?
We're right between in between late or seed and right at the end of the A round.
And what are companies looking for from you, right? So some of these companies have had some success already, and so
Right.
they could probably go get term sheets from a lot of
most of the companies we're in are oversubscribed. Like, they already had, their investors would give them all the money they could. So we've gotten into deals because of the following reasons. One is the team we've put together at DTX. Two people here, David and Olivia, are here. I don't know where they are, but they're in the back of their hands. We have hired a head of talent, somebody who's like an excellent recruiter who helps the companies recruit. We have marketing, Olivia, who's one of the best social media marketers in the world. David, who runs operations and one of the best operations and data people. We have a retail analyst from Goldman Sachs on the team. So when people come to our offices, I'm putting up the money for all this. The partners we have and the companies we're investing in get to use those resources, and I think they're kind of actually really surprised when they come in to meet with us. We have a lot of functioning people on our team that are experts at different areas, and we're able to offer them the services. We'll invest. We also offer them services. I'd say we're also helping a number of other startups without investing, just basically being, we like to call ourselves very founder friendly. And I think the terms we do in terms of how we invest, what we invest, are very founder aligned. And so I think that's why people are letting us in their deals or coming to see us.
Would you call yourself a venture firm? Because last we saw you,
Yes.
you were busy putting the ungodly merger of Yahoo and
Yeah.
AOL together, which didn't end well, I would say. And then you were in media, and you were renaming the whole thing, that name you called it. What prompted you to move this way? I mean, you talked about direct-to-consumer. You did talk about direct-to-consumer media.
Yes.
You had talked last time you were on one of our stages.
You were at our Code conference last year, Kara and Peter Kafka interviewing you, and I noticed, pretty quickly that you were using direct-to-consumer terminology, and so you were probably thinking, you were obviously thinking along these lines from then.
Were you just like, oh God, these Verizon executives, I want to kill them and I got to get out of here, or what?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Verizon, so let me just talk about Verizon and Oath for one quick minute. One is, I think Verizon, again, I've been involved in a while there, but this is my outside perspective, having been there when this stuff was starting. I think 5G is going to be revolutionary, and for Verizon, that's really, I think Verizon's, from the outside, just reading what they're talking about now, and it was when I was there, that's their number one priority. And I think that the assets that we had put together at Oath, which was 1 billion consumers and $7 or $8 billion of revenue, which were all digital, I think are assets that play really well into what the 5G landscape is going to look like. And when I started at Verizon and all the way up almost through when I left, there were multiple strategies there. There was a Go 90 strategy for media. There was 3 or 4 different kind of media strategies. We were one of them. And I think, to be honest with you, what's happened and what was happening and what we did up until people at the company knew I was leaving before I was going to leave, because we announced it to the management team, is it made sense to integrate Oath and Verizon together, because while I was there, the most powerful thing that could be done is having Oath distributed on Verizon phones, having really Verizon's content strategy be what the Oath assets were in Go 9. We finally got all those things put together. So I don't know, I have the up-to-date stuff of what's happening at Verizon today, but if you were going to go compete in 5G, it makes a lot of sense to have one coherent strategy behind that and go compete. So I think, your perspective might not be, it didn't end well. My perspective is it started with multiple strategies and ended with one, which is now it's Verizon Media. It's all integrated, and I hope, and I feel like a proud alumni of it. I hope it scales like crazy.
Because telco executives are so good at content, as we're seeing over at AT&T.
Well,
but that's another poor Richard Plepler. But in terms of, you talked about direct-to-consumer.
Yeah.
Was that in your head?
Because
you've never spoken a word of commerce to me in our long history there, except for advertising, like selling to.
Yeah. So again, just to go back, probably way before I met you, in 1993 or 1994, I had a newspaper in Boston. And the newspaper I had one, and then we ended up buying another one that was in Harvard Square. And, that was my first lesson in commerce and how direct-to-consumer works. We used to have a coupons page and Harvard students used to take Newbery Comics. Does anyone know what Newbery Comics is? I was asking people earlier. Yes, so some people. Thank you. I was with a bunch of you.
Can you tell me? I don't know.
Do you know what it is?
Nope.
No. It was a record store. They used to sell records and CDs and things like that. But there were a whole bunch of advertisers in that were in Harvard Square and Cambridge that used to put coupons in the newspaper, and the results were that the consumers would basically use the coupons constantly, but they would build up relationships. And at one point, the Newbery Comics people said, we're going to cut our marketing budget and we're stopping advertising in your newspaper. And, we knew from dealing with all the people who used our newspaper that we're like, wow, they really like your Newbery Comics. That's probably not going to go over well. And they pulled it out, and 1 week later they came back and were like, put it back in. And the reality is that the relationships that they had built up with all these consumers mattered a lot. And then if you fast forward when I was at Starwave, Paul Allen's company, I did Snowball, did Google. In the last 20 years I've only done Google and AOL really, but all of those experiences, basically, all the stuff I did on the media side was all two-way relationships. And the more time I started to become, really what happened, well, the reason I thought about DTC is I started to go back to those memories based on meeting a lot of the DTC founders. I'm coaching a few CEOs for DTC founders. And when they started talking to me about it, and I started to think about things like GDPR and some of the things that are happening underneath the surface that I think are going to change long term, I thought, wow, this might actually re-engineer the entire way commerce is done, and this is a really interesting opportunity. So I don't know, I spent almost 10 years at AOL and doing Oath and Verizon and all that other stuff, and they were going to integrate it into Verizon, and I'm like, you know what's the next thing that I would be interested in doing? And I've been really passionate about it, for the last couple of years, thinking about it, studying it, and DTX was an opportunity for us to, for me to just 100% only focus on direct-to-consumer. That's all I've been doing.
So the other piece that you've talked about a little bit when you made your announcement about the company was hosting or producing sort of these experiences. And I think you described them as a cross between CES and Coachella?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sounds fun, right?
No, it sounds like the tempter of hell.
I mean, if it leans more, does it lean more Coachella? I mean, so...
What do you mean?
What do you
don't
mean?
understand
What
what
do you
you're
mean?
talking
I
about.
was intentionally vague. But
That's not vague in any way. It's
right,
just strange.
right. It's strange. Yeah.
It's like
strangely vague.
Sounds like AOL Yahoo, but go ahead.
So
do
well, if 1 billion consumers show up and we have $8 billion in revenue, we'll be happy.
What are you going to do?
We are going to bring direct-to-consumer brands to what I would say are first-tier consumer markets and second-tier commerce markets. And what I mean by that is, if you watch what's happening in DTC and you watch what's happening in commerce, everybody's launching a flagship store in New York, San Francisco, Los Angeles, London. There are tremendous consumers in other parts of the country and in the world who would benefit greatly from having direct interactions with those brands.
So you're doing like a Steve Case, like the rise of the rest.
No.
I know what he's doing, but he's saying there's talent in the rest of the country, there's other places.
Yeah, in my case, there's money in the rest of the country. And by the way, there's not only money, there's really good relationships that will be built. And I just spent a week in China and Shanghai, and one of the things I spent a bunch of time doing was studying what's happening in new retail with Alibaba, things like that. The interesting thing of what's happening in China and what you see here is all of the statistics look very similar. And a lot of people are talking about O2O, which is online to offline. We're thinking about offline to online. And I think when you look at the data and statistics, having someone have a physical interaction with brands or experiences and what it does to their online or mobile consumption is really important. And the second thing, this is another long-term thing, I think society will continue to change where people are starting to get really smart about the time and energy they're putting online versus they're putting, offline. And if it were a choice for my family and my kids and my friends' kids and other families or people that I know, I'd rather have them spend some of their time offline interacting with brands and services they've probably heard of. No, it could be digital brands, but then having the experiences online. And I think the enhancement that will happen from offline to online is as big as
what is
online.
this Coachella thing you
What?
speak of? What is it? What do you plan to
tell
do?
you.
What are you going to go to like Kansas City and like put a Casper mattress down? What? Like what do you like whatever? Your bra company or what?
It'll be a programmed entertainment and retail experience that will
In a place.
Okay. And
Like a mall place or like a...
probably less mall.
Less mall, more...
Cooler. You said
more
Coachella.
Yes,
more,
Coachella.
more grass?
Coachella's not in a mall, so it's like
Grass, sand?
what? Sand, grass, turf.
Are you still figuring out, or do you...
No, we know. We have 3D models built of it, and yeah, we know what we're doing.
He's doing the Fire Festival again.
Yeah.
No, but it's which people
You're
go.
not the first person who's brought that up. We
Really?
go to meetings and we're like, hey, this is what we're doing, and people say,
That was
have you seen the
lucrative- was
documentary on
lucrative for a
Fire
little
Festival?
bit.
I'm like, so no, we're hiring people who are experts at it. I watched the Fire Festival both of them documentaries, and incredibly entertaining, and also a case where I felt like there probably could have been different people on the teams to help think about what
Okay.
the
All right.
setup and structure and
So
output was.
do you think of having, sorry to push here, but entertainment, food, like the whole,
Entertainment, food, beverage, retail.
But commerce at the center of the,
Experiences.
but like you want people-
Commerce is part of it, but it's a more holistic type of experience.
and charge people, or are you selling things?
Both.
You're just throwing a party in the
No,
Midwest. What?
both. People will pay and will sell things.
Right, so the idea is to get them interested in it, to get them to use your online products.
Yes.
And will you use just the things you're invested in, or?
No. The investment, by the way, one thing I should have said, when we're investing in the companies we're investing in, we tell them up front, we're going to be doing a whole bunch of stuff in this space. You don't have to use any of it. So you do whatever you want. We want to invest in you because we love you and want to do your stuff. If our stuff works for you, great. If it doesn't, don't worry about it. So it's other partners.
I'm curious about your timing of entering this market. So I
Yeah.
think when first announced, I tweeted something, and I was serious. It was not sarcastic. I see a smile on your face. You don't believe me. But I said, some people look at this space right now and think it's like peak direct-to-consumer. Like there's 10 different direct-to-home toothbrush brands and tons of the venture capital has gone like this over the last few years. Facebook and Instagram advertising, expensive, not sort of the same openings there. You talk about, cost of acquiring customer. So what am I missing there on the timing? Is it just you think this is a coastal thing and there's room in the center of the country? Or?
No, I think you hit. So first of all, when you tweeted that, and I think I tweeted back at you about it.
You did.
Which is, I think there's categories that are probably overstuffed with DTC brands and investments and those things. But I think
Such as?
the overall trend, I wouldn't comment individually. I'm not expert enough, but I think if you see more than 10 products in one category and they all look almost identical, and there's 10 different venture capitalists going after the exact same space, I'd say that there's probably only going to be a few winners there. By the way, I think the same thing's true on the OTT content space. There's a bunch of spaces online now you can look at where people are piling money in, where there's probably overinvestments. But DTC overall, if you went product by product, category by category, industry by industry in DTC, there's so many companies you've never heard of and seen, rightly so, the Caspers, the Warby Parkers, those are amazing companies, and they get a ton of notoriety. There's also about 10,000 other categories they don't have 10 people, they might have 1 or 2, but they're doing interesting things in them. So I think what's going to happen, like people ask us all the time, isn't there a DTC ceiling? These companies can only get so big. That may be true. I don't think it's true, but what will happen is the aggregate of all these things together. If you have 10,000 DTC brands and they're $10 million or $50 million or $500 million, they may not add up to look like Google and Facebook right now, but when you add up all of them together over time and what's likely to happen with the condensing of the market in the next 10 or 20 years, DTC, I think, is going to end up being a very significant part of the future, in the future of commerce.
Just one of the concerns in some of the DTC categories are, wow, these companies they're growing faster than any company in their space or category before them, but they're not necessarily growing their market. And so do they just, are they getting pumped with venture capital and then they're going to hit their ceiling, after 4 or 5 years? I think we've seen it a little bit in the mattress category, actually. So it sounds like you're saying there's just, there are many more categories.
The issue I see in having not been in this industry and then coming into commerce more now, there's 2 things that stand out to me. One is every major press article around traditional commerce tends to be negative. Not all the time, but there's so much angst around what's happening in retail overall, which a lot of it's deserved, but there are a lot of interesting things happening in traditional retail that I think are interesting. The second one is the DTC categories that are super hot, the four or five super hot categories, get 90% of the coverage in press And what we're seeing, because we have people coming into our offices all day doing DTC, there's just an amazing amount of ingenuity, invention, and innovation happening in different categories. So I think, again, it's one of these things you're going to wake up 5, 7, 10, 15 years from now and say, wow, this was like a really amazing transformation of how these industries happen. And again, it's going to be for the reasons that these companies all talk to their consumers all the time. The amount of product innovation that's happening is like truly tremendous.
What areas do you think that hasn't been seen? And give us an area that you think hasn't been over.
I think there's categories, like, again, like if you go back to Olive and June,
There's a lot of beauty stuff.
Well, there's a lot of beauty stuff, but nail salons, for instance, what they're doing in nails hasn't really hit the household. Like I live in a household with my son and my wife, my son and 2 daughters. My daughters and my wife will go get mani-pedi type things in general, but my daughters really like to do it at home. They want to experiment with it, and every place I've been, I've seen that. I think Olive and June are going to bring big city mani-pedi experience into everybody's home. And when you talk about the category creation, I think that's going to create a new category, which is how in-home beauty gets done. And there's a lot of people in the different categories in beauty, but a lot of stuff could be done at home. And I think that's one of the things that you're going to see. I won't, Olive and June will have a whole bunch of product announcements coming out, but when you see it, I think you'll know what I'm talking about.
And to what Jason said,
Yeah.
you could have a lot of small businesses, like a lot of smaller. Do you ever knit them together in some way? Because what are you saying? These could be a lot of 10,
You're
50,
saying
yeah.
I think there's going to be a lot of consolidation in the future. We're not going to be the ones to consolidate them, but I think if you take the beauty category or any category and you dig into all of the DTC brands and micro categories within, if you went to a Procter & Gamble or Unilever and look at all of their products, and then each one of their products has multiple DTC companies trying to innovate that space. So I think you'll end up seeing the recreation of really large consolidated companies. It may not happen for years, but I think it will happen. And the reason is not because they were, they're cheaper than what happens in the Unilever Procter & Gamble. It's because the product innovation, it's hard, having spent so much time now with DTC companies, the amount of product innovation that happens at those companies with direct consumer interactions, seems to me to be deeper and faster than it is at most other traditional companies.
Can I ask you one question about advertising? You spent most of your life in advertising, slinging ads, essentially.
Yeah.
Right now, the data issues around them,
Yeah.
your companies will need advertising. I just saw Warby Parker on a national television ad, first time I saw one, I think. How do you look at right now the ad space, especially the digital ad space, where Jason was saying you're going to do a lot of your advertising on Facebook and Google, essentially?
Yeah.
A lot of pressure on those companies about what they're doing around people's data.
Yeah.
They dominate everything possible, government breakup of these businesses, essentially. How do you look at the space now, as someone who's been in it, and you're away from Google, you're away from the big companies.
Yeah.
When you look at it as someone who's going to be using them, are you like, they have to be broken up, or their data abuse is?
I just to be real, there's a few things on advertising right now. One is a lot of people are questioning advertising, almost like after the dot-com bubble, where like, oh my God, it doesn't work, or there's all these issues with the privacy things. It's a little bit of that. My general sense is it's a good time to go in and invest in innovative advertising right now because everyone's so fearful. And I think very few people share that viewpoint. But I believe the companies that really triple down on advertising now, because there's going to be a lot of people getting out of it or trying to get out of it, is a good time for that. That's number one. Number two is I think the data.
Talking about building advertising businesses or
building, innovating, competing. I think that's one. I think two is the data issues. The data issues are real. I think that when you go back 5 years ago and talk to general consumers, they didn't really understand how ads were using data and those things. And not that everyone still understands it, but I'd say it's a topic now. Like consumers want to know where the data is, how it's getting used. And I think it's also hitting country by country, state by state now. So, we haven't been in a recession yet. And when there is a recession and people are more desperate for tax money, for those things in general, you're also going to have people examining how all these companies are making money and all these different things. So you're gonna have a combo of privacy, data, and economics drive what I think, I'm not gonna say it's a breakup of the companies. I think it'll be more focused on the economics and who's got the economics. And again, I've said this publicly before, my long-term, the fact that consumers aren't getting a benefit financially out of advertising other than getting products delivered, I think somebody will innovate a product that gives consumers back money for their data while they're using media properties and while they're using advertising. I think there's a lot of value that
Commerce.
What?
Or commerce or anything.
You know, commerce, but also, you know, you could come up with a model where you paid consumers, consumers got a payment from companies based on what data they used for the consumer. You know, in our landscape today, companies have consumer data, and the consumers aren't savvy about it. But I think all these changes eventually will have consumers getting a bigger benefit out of data.
So what's your advice to the startups you're working with in this space on either planning for what you think is coming in the advertising world or taking advantage?
Yeah, so I think what's happening today, again, this is the experiences only we've had, so this may not apply more broadly, but the changes that have been happening on, like, you know, Facebook and Instagram have done a great job, I think, helping these companies get off the ground. I think, you know, Facebook and Instagram, just like Google did when I was at Google, tend to change their algorithms of what works and what doesn't work. So I think recently, in the last period of time, there's a number of changes. It might be happening because Facebook's innovating their product. It might be because they're using data differently, those things. But those platforms are going to continue to change their structures. And then if you're a DTC company latched onto those, every time they change, it's like it's a wave effect.
Google did it.
Right, and Google did it. And Google, when I was there, right before I left Google, we did the Panda release that changed all the algorithms on the index, and we also changed the ads quality, and that put a giant ripple effect through all the customers. I see some of that happening now in the social media landscape, and people will adjust. But the biggest advice, you know, we tend to spend time with people is you're going to have to adjust to those changes all the time, but you also have to start thinking about where else you can go to get growth. And that's why I said the CR and the AC, instead of just CAC. A lot of people run around and say, oh, my CAC is changing, you know, these are all issues. You have to also be super aggressive about being a scientist on the revenue side. Like, where are the other things, places you can go to basically interact with consumers so they'll love your brand, you'll get first-party data with them, and you'll be in a good experience with them. And I think that's what I see in the DTC landscape. A lot of companies are really starting to think about that. And part of the reason they're thinking about it is when Facebook changed some of the algorithms, people popped their heads up and said, whoa, you know, this has been a great vehicle for me, but if they're going to, if I'm going to be relying on them and they're going to make tweaks, I need to make sure I have other places, you know, to advertise. I think Facebook's, by the way, I think another credit to Facebook and Instagram, you know, they've done a really good job of building an industry around DTC abilities for these companies. And I think that's another, you know, I think Mark and team get a lot of credit for a lot of things that they've done. This is another area where they've really helped an industry get off the ground. But now it'll continue to change.
One platform we haven't talked about is Amazon, and I know they're in the midst of making a push to attract direct-to-consumer brands to their site. If you don't play ball with them, you could see examples where you type in away luggage, and then what's the first thing that pops up because away is not there, but Amazon Basics luggage looks kind of similar, but like third of the price. You know, that seems like an okay model. What is the discussion like around Amazon and the companies?
Yeah, I think that is another topic that comes up. Well, one, I should just say, like, we have an office in Soho, so we're above the Amazon store and across the street from Allbirds. So in my chair where I sit, we all sit at one.
That's the weird Amazon
weird 4-star. So out our window, I see the Amazon flag. The top of it's in our window, and right across the street is the Allbirds. And I'm very good friends with the Allbirds founders. I love them, and I love the Amazon people too.
You love everybody.
What?
You love everybody too.
I don't love everybody, but the thing that's interesting is if you think about it, is those two brands being across the street from those other Allbirds, maniacal differentiation around their products. I think they've done a really good job. I think they have more coming. Amazon, when we hear from DTC companies about like the away luggage example, they start to get described as like the retail tensions that you used to hear about from the CPG companies with the big traditional retailers about like who owns the data, they're launching white label products, those things. So when I sit in those meetings, having spent a lot of time at a lot of the big CPG companies and a lot of the retailers, you know, I hear some of those same things coming, and that might be the natural state where Amazon is doing a really good job. They're scaling their white label solutions with Amazon Basics, and the brands are going to be in a tussle with them.
Well, in this case, they're using the data from the brands to do so. I mean,
Okay,
come
but
on.
this goes back to my data, but this is
Yes, but they never had data in this amount.
So,
This is
the brand,
So this goes back to-
are
yeah.
brands you're talking to feeling like they have at some point they need to carve off part of their catalog and do business, otherwise they're going to just, you know, they're going to just
You need to be on Amazon.
let this.
Yeah, here's what I hear them saying. They have to be on Amazon for part of their business, and then part of the business they're being careful about what they're putting on and not putting on. And I think that's very true across the board for most of the people we're talking about. Amazon's too big to ignore, and they're barely benefit. Amazon has a great platform. They've done a really good job making commerce really easy. But the question is, if you're away luggage, you know, can you bet your whole farm on that? Sounds like no. I haven't done that.
Honestly, if I had a business like that, I'd back slowly out of the room with Amazon at
Right.
every opportunity.
Right.
But
So people, I think, it's what people
yeah,
are. People are
where-
really trying to be thoughtful, I think, about what they do now with Amazon. But that's definitely a topic that comes up.
Right. Okay. Questions
Any
from the audience?
questions? One right here.
Sure. Hi, Mark Vermut from News Star.
Can you stand up, please?
Sure.
Thank you.
No worries. You touched a little, it sounds like, on moving the marketing mix off of paid social and some of the more digital platforms, obviously with Experiential. But when you think about, because it sounds like you're looking for DTC brands to move more traditional and offline, where do you see those dollars going? Do they have scale to invest? And does programmatic TV play a role in enabling that?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've been talking about is, you know, you should go to whatever channel works the best, the fastest, and get you first-party data and a direct relationship with the consumer. So, you know, right now it feels like maximizing the digital channels is a really good strategy. Once you've done that, I think a lot of the brands we're seeing are going to TV.
Mailings.
And what?
Mailings.
Yes.
At least in San Francisco.
Yeah,
Like
mailings,
dozens.
TV. Yeah, so there's people are really starting to experiment, you know, off digital. But I would say this also in the digital landscape, just for 1 second. I think there are some fairly big platforms that people haven't paid close enough attention to or haven't taken the time to look at them. So I think there's a whole bunch of offline stuff that's possible. There's also some digital platforms probably that they could be using.
What are those?
I think again, I'm not involved in these companies, so what I'm about to say is I'm not shilling for anybody, but I think like Pinterest is a really interesting property. I think they have really deep vertical information on things. I think Reddit is interesting just in terms of the community there overall. So there's platforms like that I think people have probably toyed with, but those would be worthwhile spending time on them because they're big communities, they're deep, and I don't necessarily hear those a lot when I talk to the DTC companies. But if I were running a DTC company, those are the types of things that I would be really spending time like a scientist trying to figure out.
And what about locational places like Helen was just talking about WeWork deals? They're you know things
Yeah.
that are. But I noticed recently Soul Cycle. There's suddenly products in there that
Yes,
they're showing
yeah,
off.
yeah.
Which
But I
are,
think the other thing is there's an explosion of physical products going into other people's channels.
Right.
So I think that's another area of opportunity. So I think you're going to see a mixture of experiential, offline, and online. You know, we're more spending our time on the experiential side. I know the digital side fairly well. And, you know, I think there's room to grow on digital and different platforms. And I think there's areas within offline too that
but
would work.
Instagram's the far and away.
I think most people have, like, at least the companies we've met with, most of them have started with social. And I would say,
You didn't mention Twitter at all.
well, Twitter I would consider definitely also on that list. I don't know. I'm actually not as knowledgeable on Twitter from an ad standpoint or marketing standpoint, but Twitter would be a total natural also. What do you think?
No, I think it's a cesspool.
What, you what?
I think the cesspool.
Zespel?
Yeah.
Let me ask you one quick question.
I like Andrew Ocasio.
So you're probably doing this also, Jason. What,
Go for
you
it.
guys have been doing live broadcasting,
Yeah.
or you especially, I've noticed. What is the learnings and reaction to live broadcasting?
What do you mean?
I just like, what is it,
Oh yeah, you're like live video on Twitter all the time now.
yeah,
like
so
peering, peering down at
is,
the camera.
what is your sense of it? Like, are people adopting it into
Yes,
it?
it pushes people to the podcasts.
Does it?
Yes.
So it works.
And the columns or whatever.
Right.
the
So
hell.
there's an example. If I'm a DTC brand and I saw you doing it, I'm like,
Yeah.
you're taking your time to do it. Something must be working.
We did one from a beach in Hawaii that got 150,000 views in like seconds. It was
Right. So
weird.
that's meaningful. I mean,
It could be I'm just crazy and people like watching
What?
it. It could be
I
I'm
have
just.
no idea what they're talking about right now.
We
by
do
the way.
live events. We do live things talking about a column or a
Right.
podcast on
Right.
Twitter.
But for instance, if you had 150,000 live people watching, you probably would have been like the 5th or 6th largest cable channel in the United States at that time period. So like that's
It's me and Sean Hannity. Yeah.
right.
That's it.
All right.
Any other questions here? Yeah, we'll go up here.
Here we'll do here and here and then we'll finish.
Thank you, Yusuf Sgali at SunTrust. A couple questions. On the DTC side and the different verticals that you invested in, are they more on the experiential side or are they more on the physical side? Because it seems like you've spoken about both. And then on the unit economics, it seems to me that most of the companies that you invested in so far tend to be very small. So when you were talking about focusing on companies that understand unit economics and have proven unit economics, are you talking about companies that have already reached that point? Because assume that most of your companies have only theoretically gotten to some understanding of unit economics.
Yeah, I think just on the second part first, most of the companies we're invested in, we know they haven't reached their maximum unit economics, but they have cultures and processes that will allow them to continue to get to whatever that end state is in general. So most of the companies we're dealing with are probably 10% or 20% into their unit economics. Some of them more. Some of them, like a third love's probably more. And then what we're investing in, so we've done a number of investments in physical goods companies, and then we did an investment into what I would call a direct to college, really just the consumers around college, and niche.com, which is down in Pittsburgh. It's a great company, Carnegie Mellon engineers. And really what they're doing is bringing a two-way relationship to the college process. And for those of you, I have a son right now who's going through the college, process or starting to look at schools, watching him look at the traditional ways to look at college information, which is like an editorially driven, hey, this college does this is how they do it, versus what Niche does, which intakes a lot of the two-way relationships with the college students themselves. He's instantaneously attracted to the platform that basically looks more like the other platforms he uses. And so I think we're doing hard physical goods, but there's other things that we're doing which are more kind of digital direct-to-consumer products and services, and that's one of them. That's been really successful, I think, and really interesting model too.
Right here, and then last one, quick.
Ken Cassar, Rakuten Intelligence. Do you have any particular bias as to whether companies that you invest in, ultimately the end game is acquisition by a traditional company versus remaining independent, maybe IPO?
The founders we're investing in, we go in with our theory is that they are obsessed and passionate enough and learning based. Like a lot of stuff we look for when we meet with them is whether or not they're science based versus opinion based. And theoretically, if they're science based, they'll keep learning and learning and learning. And if they can live on their own, great. It strikes me as likely, watching what's happening in the offline spaces, that a lot of these DTC companies are going to be acquisition targets. And then I think that's why we say we're founder aligned, because at the end of the day, we've told the founders when we invested in them, we're really going to work and counsel you and do whatever we can. You got to make up your own mind about where your output is going to be from this. So we're not at that stage yet, and I don't know where it'll end up, but we're trying to invest in companies that we think can build standalone companies, and they're really interested in building big companies also.
I actually have one more question that sort of piggybacks on that. You know, the topic of valuation when companies are raising money and entrepreneurs are raising money. I know I've never been an entrepreneur, but I've, you know, friendly and professionally know a lot of them. And I know there's a whole thing around dilution, and you want a highest valuation as possible. On the other hand, you're not seeing a ton of acquisitions in retail to e-commerce over the last few years. There's a couple of giant ones and then tiny ones. But when you look at entrepreneurs that have had successful outcomes, you know, like Native deodorant brand, you know, they raised less than $5 million, sold for, I think, around 100. Or Movement watches out of LA, they raised basically nothing, sold for 100 to 200. I'm curious if you have any conversations around valuation and sort of the bar you're setting for success, and whether you're pricing yourself out of, you know, acquisition option.
Yeah, I think one. I'm glad you brought this up, because I do think this is a mistake. There was a period of time where everyone wanted a mega valuation, and the founders got really diluted. The other thing, I should have said this in our thread, the other thing we want is the companies we're investing in, we want the founders to have really big stakes in the company, and I think having a really big stake for them has a whole bunch of psychological things, but it also, if they can become profitable faster, they, I think, will end up in a much better financial situation for themselves and for the company and those things. So we've had this conversation with every single one of the founders, and one of the questions that I asked the founders, or our team asked the founders, is, you know, how much future money raising you're doing and what valuations you're going to be doing at, and what's your end goal in terms of ownership stake. And I think that you get a lot of answers back on that one. A lot of people want to print the big number on their valuations. The other thing that's happened is when people are printing these big numbers on valuations, they're doing structured deals.
Sure.
And that's the other thing people don't realize is you might see somebody print a valuation of $500 million or $1 billion or $2 billion on a private fundraising. What they don't see is the ratcheting that's happening on the structure behind. So the entrepreneur could end up in a situation where they're going to lose control of the company, or, you know, if there's a hiccup in the market, which, again, you got to remember, like, for anyone who's under the age of, let's call it 35, or maybe 32, they haven't lived through any kind of a disruption in the money-raising market, the recession, recessionary period, those things. So you kind of forget, like, what it's like to be in that environment, but those things change really quickly. And I think the money-raising side of things is very easy right now. Like, we've had people just straight out call us to offer us money for DTX, and, you know, to invest in it. And, you know, DTC is a hot area, we're in it, so I can understand that. But, you know, really, I don't know if you're in the middle of a recession. I don't know if those type of things are going to happen. So with the founders, we've been talking to them about, like, just, you know, make sure you set up your structure, your money-raising for a rainy day, because it hasn't been much rain in the last 10 years. But when it comes, rainy days are also the best time to be set up structurally for success, because while everyone else pulls back, if you're set up well to get through that, and you're happy with your structure, you're happy with the amount of money you raise, you're happy with your ownership, it's a great time to, like, put the turbo down on kind of powering through those recessionary, you know, times. So we do talk to people about that.
Great.
Thank you, Tim.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. See you.